The Bhagavad Gita, often referred to as simply the Gita, is a 700-verse Hindu scripture in Sanskrit that is part of the Hindu epic Mahabharata. The Gita is set in a narrative framework of a dialogue between Pandava Prince Arjuna and his guide and charioteer Lord Krishna, facing the duty as a warrior to fight the Dharma Yudhha, a righteous war between Pandavas and Kauravas. Arjuna is counselled by Lord Krishna to fulfill his Kshatriya duty as a warrior and establish Dharma. Inserted in this appeal to Kshatriya Dharma is a dialogue between diverging attitudes concerning methods toward the attainment of liberation. The Bhagavad Gita was exposed to the world through Sanjaya, who senses and recognizes all the events of the battlefield. Sanjaya is Dhritarashtra's advisor and also his charioteer. The Bhagavad Gita presents a synthesis of the concept of Dharma, theistic bhakti, the yogic ideals of moksha through jnana, bhakti, karma, and Raja Yoga and Samkhya philosophy. Numerous commentaries have been written on the Bhagavad Gita with widely differing views on the essentials. Vedanta commentators read varying relations between self and Brahman in the text. Advaita Vedanta sees the non-dualism of Atman and Brahman as its essence, whereas Bheda and Vishishtadvaita see Atman and Brahman as both different and non-different, and Advaita sees them as different. The setting of the Gita in a battlefield has been interpreted as an allegory for the ethical and moral struggles of the human life. The Bhagavad Gita's call for selfless action inspired many leaders of the Indian independence movement, including Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi referred to the Gita as his spiritual dictionary. Composition and significance. Authorship. The epic Mahabharata is traditionally ascribed to the sage Vyasa. The Bhagavad Gita, being a part of the Mahabharata's Bhishma Parva, is also ascribed to him. Date of composition. Theories on the date of composition of the Gita vary considerably. Scholars accept dates from the 5th century to the 2nd century BCE as the probable range. Professor Jeanine Fowler, in her commentary on the Gita, considers 2nd century BCE to be the likely date of composition. Kashinath Upadhyaya, a Gita scholar, on the basis of the estimated dates of Mahabharata, Brahma Sutras, and other independent sources, concludes that the Bhagavad Gita was composed in the 5th or 4th century BCE. It is generally agreed that, unlike the Vedas, which have to be preserved letter perfect, the Gita was a popular work whose reciters would inevitably conform to changes in language and style. So the earliest surviving components of this dynamic text are believed to be no older than the earliest external references we have to the Mahabharata epic, which may include an allusion in Panini's 4th century BCE grammar. It is estimated that the text probably reached something of a final form by the early Gupta period. The actual dates of composition of the Gita remain unresolved. Bhagavad Gita in ancient Indian literature. There is no reference to the Bhagavad Gita in Buddhist literature, i.e. Tripitaka. The Buddha refers to 3 Veda rather than the 4 Vedas, as per general perception in many dialogues. So, availability of Bhagavad Gita during Buddha's time creates doubt. Hindu synthesis and Smriti. Due to its presence in the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita is classified as a Smriti text, or that which is remembered. The Smriti texts of the period between 200 BCE to 100 CE belong to the emerging Hindu synthesis, proclaiming the authority of the Vedas while integrating various Indian traditions and religions. Acceptance of the Vedas became a central criterion for defining Hinduism over and against the heterodoxies, which rejected the Vedas. The so-called Hindu synthesis emerged during the early classical period of Hinduism. According to Alf Hilterbetel, A period of consolidation in the development of Hinduism took place between the time of the late Vedic Upanishad and the period of the rise of the Guptas, which he calls the Hindu synthesis, Brahmanic synthesis, or Orthodox synthesis. It developed in interaction with other religions and peoples. The emerging self-definitions of Hinduism were forged in the context of continuous interaction with heterodox religions throughout this whole period, and with foreign people from the third phase on. The Bhagavad Gita is the sealing achievement of this Hindu synthesis, incorporating various religious traditions. According to Hilton Betel, Bhakti forms an essential ingredient of this synthesis, which incorporates Bhakti into Vedanta. According to Deutsch and Dalvi, the Bhagavad Gita attempts to forge a harmony between different strands of Indian thought, Jnana, Dharma and Bhakti. Deutsch and Dalvi note that the authors of the Bhagavad Gita must have seen the appeal of the soteriologies both of the heterodox traditions of Buddhism and Jainism and of the more orthodox ones of Samkhya and Yoga, while the Brahmanic tradition emphasized the significance of Dharma as the instrument of goodness. Sheepas mentions the Bhagavad Gita as a Brahmanical text which uses the Shramanic and yogic terminology to spread the Brahmanic idea of living according to one's duty or dharma, in contrast to the yogic ideal of liberation from the workings of karma. According to Basham, the Bhagavad Gita combines many different elements from Samkhya and Vedanta philosophy. In matters of religion, its important contribution was the new emphasis placed on devotion, which has since remained a central path in Hinduism. In addition, the popular theism expressed elsewhere in the Mahabharata and the transcendentalism of the Upanishads converge, and a god of personal characteristics is identified with the Brahman of the Vedic tradition. The Bhagavad Gita thus gives a typology of the three dominant trends of Indian religion: Dharma-based householder life, enlightenment-based renunciation, and devotion-based theism. Bhagavad Gita as a synthesis. The Bhagavad Gita may be treated as a great synthesis of the ideas of the impersonal spiritual monism with personalistic monotheism, of the yoga of action with the yoga of transcendence of action, and these again with yogas of devotion and knowledge. The influence of the Bhagavad Gita was such that its synthesis was adapted to and incorporated into specific Indian traditions. Nicholson mentions the Shiva Gita as an adaptation of the Vishnu-oriented Bhagavad Gita into Shiva-oriented terminology, and the Isvara Gita as borrowing entire verses from the Krishna-oriented Bhagavad Gita and placing them into a new Shiva-oriented context. Status: the Bhagavad Gita is part of the Prasthana Traya, which also includes the Upanishads and Brahma Sutras. These are the key texts for the Vedanta, which interprets these texts that give a unified meaning. Advaita Vedanta sees the non-dualism of Atman and Brahman as its essence, whereas Bheda and Vishishtadvaita see Atman and Brahman as both different and non-different, and Advaita sees them as different. In recent times, the Advaita interpretation has gained worldwide popularity due to the Neo-Vedanta of Vivekananda and Radhakrishnan, while the Akintyabheda interpretation has gained worldwide popularity via the Hare Krishnas, a branch of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Although early Vedanta gives an interpretation of the Shruti texts of the Upanishads, and its main commentary, the Brahman Sutras, the popularity of the Bhagavad Gita was such that it could not be neglected. It is referred to in the Brahman Sutras, and Shankara, Bhaskara and Ramanuja all three wrote commentaries on it. The Bhagavad Gita is different from the Upanishads in format and content, and accessible to all, in contrast to the Shruti. which are only to be read and heard by the higher castes. Some branches of Hinduism give it the status of an Upanishad and consider it to be a Ruti or revealed text, according to Pandit, who gives a modern orthodox interpretation of Hinduism. Since the Bhagavad Gita represents a summary of the Upanishadic teachings, it is sometimes called the Upanishad of the Upanishads. Content. Narrative. In the epic Mahabharata, after Sanjaya, counsellor of the Kuru king Dhritarashtra, returns from the battlefield to announce the death of Bhishma, he begins recounting the details of the Mahabharata war. Bhagavad Gita forms the content of this recollection. The Gita begins before the start of the climactic Kurukshetra war, where the Pandava prince Arjuna is filled with doubt on the battlefield. Realizing that his enemies are his own relatives, their loved friends, and revered teachers, he turns to his charioteer and guide, God incarnate Lord Shri Krishna, for advice. Responding to Arjuna's confusion and moral dilemma, Krishna explains to Arjuna his duties as a warrior and prince, elaborating on a variety of philosophical concepts. Characters: Arjuna, one of the Pandavas; Lord Shri Krishna, Arjuna's charioteer and guru who was actually an incarnation of God; Sanjaya, counsellor of the Kuru king Dhritarashtra, Kuru king. Overview of chapters. Bhagavad Gita comprises 18 chapters in the Bhishma Parva of the epic Mahabharata and consists of 700 verses. Because of differences in recensions, the verses of the Gita may be numbered in the full text of the Mahabharata as chapters 6.25 to 42 or as chapters 6.23 to 40. According to the recension of the Gita commented on by Adi Shankara, a prominent philosopher of the Vedanta school, the number of verses is 700, but there is evidence to show that old manuscripts had 745 verses. The verses themselves, composed with similes and metaphors, are poetic in nature. The verses mostly employ the range and style of the Sanskrit Anastubhmeter, and in a few expressive verses the Tristubhmeter is used. The Sanskrit editions of the Gita name each chapter as a particular form of yoga. However, these chapter titles do not appear in the Sanskrit text of the Mahabharata. Swami Chidbhavananda explains that each of the 18 chapters is designated as a separate yoga because each chapter, like yoga, trains the body and the mind. He labels the first chapter Arjuna Vishada Yogam, or the Yoga of Arjuna's dejection. Sir Edwin Arnold translates this chapter as the distress of Arjuna, Gita Jnanam. The Gita Jnanam is not a part of the main Bhagavad Gita, but it is commonly published with the Gita as a prefix. The verses of the Gita Jnanam offer salutations to a variety of sacred scriptures, figures, and entities, characterize the relationship of the Gita to the Upanishads, and affirm the power of divine assistance. It is a common practice to recite these before reading the Gita. Prathama Adhyaya. Arjuna has requested Krishna to move his chariot between the two armies. His growing dejection is described as he fears losing friends and relatives as a consequence of war. Sankhya Yoga. After asking Krishna for help, Arjuna is instructed into various subjects such as Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Sankhya Yoga, Buddhi Yoga, and the immortal nature of the soul. Sankhya here refers to one of 6 orthodox schools of the Hindu philosophy. This chapter is often considered the summary of the entire Bhagavad Gita. Karma Yoga. Krishna explains how Karma Yoga, i.e., performance of prescribed duties but without attachment to results, is the appropriate course of action for Arjuna. Jnana Karma Sannyasa Yoga. Krishna reveals that he has lived through many births, always teaching yoga for the protection of the pious and the destruction of the impious, and stresses the importance of accepting a guru. Karma Sannyasa Yoga. Arjuna asks Krishna if it is better to forego action or to act. Krishna answers that both are ways to the same goal, but that acting in karma yoga is superior. Dhyana Yoga or Atmasanyam Yoga. Krishna describes the Ashtanga Yoga. He further elucidates the difficulties of the mind and the techniques by which mastery of the mind might be gained. Jnana Vijnana Yoga. Krishna describes the absolute reality and its illusory energy Maya. Aksara Brahma Yoga. This chapter contains eschatology of the Bhagavad Gita, importance of the last thought before death, differences between material and spiritual worlds, and light and dark paths that a soul takes after death are described. Raja Vidya Rajagaya Yoga. Krishna explains how his eternal energy pervades, creates, preserves, and destroys the entire universe. According to theologian Christopher Southgate, verses of this chapter of the Gita are panentheistic, while German physicist and philosopher Max Bernhard Weinstein deems the work pantheistic. Vibhuti-Vistara Yoga. Krishna is described as the ultimate cause of all material and spiritual existence. Arjuna accepts Krishna as the supreme being, quoting great sages who have also done so. Visvarupa Darsana Yoga. On Arjuna's request, Krishna displays his universal form, a theophany of a being facing every way and emitting the radiance of 1,000 suns, containing all other beings and material in existence. Bhakti Yoga. In this chapter Krishna glorifies the path of devotion to God. Krishna describes the process of devotional service. He also explains different forms of spiritual disciplines. Kshatriya Vibhaga Yoga. The difference between transient perishable physical body and the immutable eternal soul is described. The difference between individual consciousness and universal consciousness is also made clear. Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga. Krishna explains the three modes of material nature pertaining to goodness, passion, and nescience. The causes, characteristics, and influence on a living entity are also described. Puruषottama Yoga. Krishna identifies the transcendental characteristics of God such as omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence. Krishna also describes a symbolic tree, which has its roots in the heavens and its foliage on earth. Krishna explains that this tree should be felled with the axe of detachment, after which one can go beyond to his supreme abode. Divasura Sampadvibhaga Yoga. Krishna identifies the human traits of the divine and the demonic natures. He counsels that to attain the supreme destination one must give up lust, anger, greed, and discern between right and wrong action by discernment through body and evidence from the scriptures. Sraddhatraya Vibhaga Yoga. Krishna qualifies the three divisions of faith, thoughts, deeds, and even eating habits corresponding to the three modes. Moksha Sannyasa Yoga. In this chapter, the conclusions of previous 17 chapters are summed up. Krishna asks Arjuna to abandon all forms of dharma and simply surrender unto him, and describes this as the ultimate perfection of life.